So, welcome to episode 3 and our last episode of When Things Go Wrong. And in this episode, I'm going to speak about 3 items. One is we haven't really spoken about when there's a serious medical emergency and what you do and how you handle it and some of the leadership that is required. And it's a bit of a recap of some of the other items that I've mentioned earlier about how to handle a party and so on in that situation. I'm also going to mention some other important items about when you are calling for a mountain rescue team and some of the ways you can do it and some of the do's and the don'ts of that also. And then very lastly, I will just recap some of the important aspects about how to handle emergencies out in the wilderness or on a mountainside. So let's first of all talk about how to handle a serious medical emergency. And let me say right from the start, I'm not a medical person, but I have handled several serious medical situations, including a death out in the wilderness. And here are some things to consider. First of all, let me say, if a party of hikers or climbers are out on a mountain, there's usually, and it is a good idea, to have some form of leadership of that party. And the leadership can be anything from a casual kind of leadership role. For instance, a bunch of friends out on the hill enjoying a Sunday morning walk. It could be a club meet, or in perhaps a more rigid style of leading a party would be a group of teenagers out in bad weather, and an adult perhaps, is leading that party, and that party might be controlled a bit more seriously and so on, that there aren't problems. But what happens then when something serious goes wrong? And we're talking about somebody's not breathing, they've perhaps been struck by lightning, they've got a compound fracture of their leg. First of all, I think that no matter what the style of leadership that a party might have, or a guide or a mountain leader might have in any given situation, but when something serious happens, a person or that person needs to take charge and take charge quickly, and to try to think very clearly about what the situation is and how you're going to save the day. This means that from perhaps a casual party of hikers out on the hill, a bunch of friends, that person who's taking charge, it's no longer going to be a democracy, it's going to be a dictatorship. And the person who knows what they're doing, and the more experience and the more skill that person has, the easier it is in order to take control. And things have to be done properly, and people have to be given specific tasks. And I'll give you an example. If CPR had to be administered, it doesn't mean that the leader of the party has to do that task. There might be somebody more experienced, but the leader might designate that task of CPR to 1 or 2 people while they sit and think about what the situation is. They're going to be stopping others from phoning out, calling other rescue. They'll stop them calling rescue agencies before it's time, and so that things are done properly. And those first few minutes after an emergency are vitally important, that things are done properly, and that the outcome of the rescue of that person will probably have the best result. So when there's been now a serious medical emergency and the initial leadership has taken charge, let's go through a few things that need to be done here and a few things that need to be considered. Number 1 is, if the person is in any danger still, then remove them from that danger. They've been struck by lightning, as I said earlier in an episode. then get them off the ridge or the place where they were struck by lightning and get them into some kind of safety, and the rest of the party. But dealing now with the actual medical problem. Out in the wilderness, and as a lay person, consider this. If the person is bleeding very badly, and particularly an arterial bleed, so there's blood squirting out of an artery, or they're not breathing, or their heart has stopped. What I can tell you right now is, do not get on the telephone and start trying to phone a mountain rescue team. Remember, mountain rescue teams take a long time to get there, or they could take a long time to get there. What actually needs to happen is the people in charge of the patient right there on the mountain have to start CPR or to stop the bleeding immediately, and that needs to happen because the patient, who could be a friend, is going to die in the next 3, 4, 5 minutes. And this is why we go in first aid courses, to learn how to do CPR and how to stop bleeding like that. But those actions have to start to happen immediately, and phoning a mountain rescue team or even phoning an ambulance that might arrive in 30 minutes is not going to help the situation. Save the person's life in the next few minutes, and when they are stable, then sit down and have a think about what to do and who you're going to call for help. And these things are absolutely vital. I have dealt with so many cases over the years of people phoning and saying, for instance, I think my friend is having a heart attack, not realizing that the mountain rescue team is a few hours away. It's no use phoning for help like that. Deal with the heart attack right there and then, and go on first aid courses to recognize what the symptoms are and how you treat them. So just to recap, there on the left, if the person is bleeding profusely, or there's no heartbeat or no breathing, you need to apply what you learn on first aid courses and try to save the person's life in the next few minutes. Now on the right, most other things that you're going to encounter in the wilderness, you actually have time to deal with it. So number one, yes, you keep calm, and number two, you try to think clearly. Then I always say that the most important thing about a first aid kit is not the bandages, it's not the plasters or the tweezers. It's having a small first aid book with you. So you don't have to remember everything that you learn on a first aid course, because you actually have time to sit and read about it and how you're going to treat the patient. For instance, I cannot remember what a 3rd degree burn looks like, nor how you treat it. But if somebody's burnt like that, I will sit down and read the book and work out how to treat them. Then, once you've applied first aid to the best of your ability, then you can sit and make a plan and probably call for a mountain rescue team. And I say you're probably going to call a mountain rescue team, but not always. There will be situations where, for instance, a private ambulance service or government ambulance service might be more appropriate to call. Remembering that ambulance services can get you much faster if you are close to a road. This accident could have happened just 100 meters off a good road, and if you simply call an ambulance, this might be the appropriate way to deal with the patient, and remembering that the patient is now the number one priority in the situation. And for example, here we see a picture of a cliff called Mountaineering in KZN of South Africa, and it's a popular rock climbing venue. If a rock climber had to have an accident at point A and perhaps be lying on the ledge at point A, this is where you call a technical mountain rescue team. They're going to need ropes and stretchers to get the person out. But if a rock climbing accident had to happen at B, or somebody was simply walking at point B, it would be far more appropriate to simply phone an ambulance service They're going to get there even faster than a mountain rescue team, and it's an easy walk down. They can put the patient on a stretcher and just walk up to the road where you can see that there are cars. And the same applies for sea. This is also a popular area for people to go walking. It is on a mountain, but that doesn't matter. If some problem happened at sea, simply phone an ambulance service. They'll get there faster, and it's a very easy hike up to where the ambulance could wait. I'd like to touch on 3 other aspects. One is, bear in mind that when these accidents happen, we're talking about mountainous areas or deep in the wilderness somewhere. You want to call a rescue team that is equipped and who understands the terrain that they have to work in. So, which brings me to the point of, in many countries, and including here in South Africa, there are private medical companies and insurance companies. They have paramedics, and most of them have some form of helicopters. But you must bear in mind that, for instance, the helicopters, although they might be well equipped medically, these are not mountain rescue helicopters. They do not have winches on them, and they are fitted out for treating patients who need urgent medical care in transportation. So in other words, there's a pilot or 2 pilots and place for a paramedic, and then there's places to put the patient. There's no place to put a mountain rescue team in. So if that aircraft has to fly into a place where you need several personnel, and bearing in mind that in some rope rescue situations you need up to 10 people to execute the operation, there is simply no space in the aircraft to accommodate all those people. The other aspect is that the aircraft that are used by private ambulance companies are generally not suited for high altitude mountain rescue. What they are really equipped to do is to go to road accidents and fetch badly injured people off a roadway or something like that, but they are not there for mountain rescue, and therefore think very carefully before you phone a private ambulance service or insurance company that is going to send the wrong kind of people with the wrong aircraft. And a good example of this happened some years back in the amphitheater area of the Drakensberg, where a person had dislocated his shoulder in a big flat area on top of the amphitheater, and he informed his private medical company, and they dispatched a helicopter. Now, he was lying at approximately 10,000 feet in altitude, or 3,000 meters. So they dispatched a private helicopter. It flew along, it came in, tried to land, it couldn't land, and it went home. The patient lay there on the ground still. The same medical company, inexperienced, they dispatched another aircraft, a different type. It flew there to where the patient was. It could not land because it didn't have the power to land in a very big and open area. Eventually, the same day, the South African Air Force got hold of the message, and the Mountain Club and the Mountain Rescue Team, and at last light the patient was lifted off with the correct kind of rescue team, with the correct kind of aircraft that could come in and land next to the patient. But all that time the patient was lying there waiting to be removed off the mountain, while a private medical company could not understand the complexity of where he was and the terrain that he was on. Another thing to consider very carefully is the advent of emergency beacons and emergency beaconing systems. Now, there are several around the world that one can use. However, these are not the silver bullet to getting a mountain rescue team. Depending on which country you're in, the services that these beacons activate can vary tremendously. And I speak here for South Africa, but this would presume would be the same in many other countries, and certainly many other countries, for instance in Africa. So depending on what system is being used, remember that you can send an emergency signal to your service provider. Now the service provider is situated somewhere in the world, and a computer signal gets sent out to some agency somewhere in the country where your emergency is occurring. So in other words, I'll give an example. You could activate an emergency beacon in the Drakensberg Mountains of South Africa. That signal might go somewhere overseas. It then gets sent back to South Africa and is picked up by some agency. Now the agencies that these signals come back to is sometimes a naval base in South Africa and sometimes civil aviation. It's not to the local mountain rescue team. So your signal, your emergency signal, now ends up in some or other government agency, reliant on a person who's sitting at a computer, receiving the signal and understanding who then now to phone. And there are many cases where this emergency call then gets bounced around to all sorts of inappropriate agencies who then don't know what to do with it either. So even if you've spent lots of money on some very expensive beaconing system, realize that if you want to get help fast and appropriate help, have the number of the local mountain rescue team and simply make a phone call, and leave emergency beacons as an absolute last resort if you really cannot get signal. And then realize that when that signal is received by somebody in some country, it's not going to mean that an instantaneous response is received. Mountain rescue teams, and including the one which I serve in, they want to know real information. They don't want cryptic messages, and they're not going to activate helicopters based on very scant information. So try as best as possible, speak directly to the mountain rescue team that you need. So I hope these 3 talks have been useful and will help you to be more skilled and more confident when things go wrong in the mountains. And remember that when things do go wrong, try to stay calm, try not to phone multiple agencies, try to do first aid to the best of your ability, give clear information to a mountain rescue team, and stay in comms so that you can speak to the rescue team again if needed. And remember that a verbal description of where you are and what's going on is far better than just simply sending coordinates. And very, very lastly, phone the local mountain rescue team for the area where you are hiking or climbing. Know their numbers and what the protocols are for that region. That's the best way and the fastest way to get help. Thanks.